someone actually had a go at me the other day because my eBird list had just X's on it, because I thought, well, I'm not counting. I'm more listening to things. I have no idea if there are 3 brown-headed honeyeaters in that tree or 10.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Guillaume Doerig. Today's guest grew up and still lives in Geelong. She has been birding since she was little and has taken it more seriously as she's gotten older. Aside from birding, she also loves getting out and about in the bush and hiking. But most excitingly, our guest is now most of the way through a Victorian Big Year. So I'm really excited about this one. Please welcome Grace Lewis. How are you doing, Grace?
Very well, thank you. And thank you very much for having me on your show.
That's okay. It's a privilege. It really is. And I'm excited about this particular interview because, I want to get into the big year a bit later on. But first of all, before we do, I like to ask my guests what aspect of birding they get most joy out of. How do you get your joy out of your birding?
Oh God, getting out, I think, is a big part of it for me. Is just getting out of the house, going birding. I find that when I've been birding for a couple of hours, my brain just goes blank, and just everything else, particularly this year and last year with COVID, everything else just kind of vanishes, all of the other stuff. And then it's just, you go out, you see the birds, they're doing their thing, they're flying around, they're feeding, they're, godwits are traveling from Siberia to here and back again. And it's just, it's just life as normal. And so it's really just blissful to just get out and then as well through the year to see the seasons change. So I think that's where I find my joy. And it's also meeting lots of other people who have got the same interests, because it's, particularly, I think this year and last year with COVID and politics and all of the other stuff that goes on outside of birding, and that fronts up in the front pages of the paper. I find when you go out birding and when you're talking to other birders, that stuff just doesn't even get spoken about. So it's like a break from the rest of life, which is amazing.
Absolutely.
We're so lucky to be able to do it. So yeah,
I know. I really understand.
I think that's what does it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the word often comes to me, escape kind of.
Yeah.
And it's like you kind of escape your everyday life, if you've got troubles at work or even with family, and
yeah,
any kind of trouble can be at least temporarily healed by going out and looking at birds. And I understand you. I really agree that you really do forget. Especially at that moment where you just find a good bird, you're like, wow! And that minute or half minute, you really do forget. It's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. You forget that you're tired, or you forget that you're sick, or you forget you brained your car, or you forget about the 50 emails at work you didn't answer, and birding makes everything better, I think.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So this joy that you have from birding. Was that part of the inspiration that drove you to start on a big year? Tell me about how, because I listened to the episode you did with Michael Greenshields on his podcast, which is a fantastic podcast. I'll put a link in the description. So can you explain how you came to the decision of big year?
I think it's a few different things. I think because I've been thinking about it more since I did that podcast and, over the last few weeks, and sort of reflecting back on this year, because it's just been unexpectedly amazing. I think part of it is about probably 12 or 13 years ago, I was going through a fair bit of stuff at home, and I hadn't really been bird watching much, and I happened to be in Borders bookshop back when Borders was a thing, and I picked up Sean Dawley's book on his big year, and then also Anorak's visiting susceptibles and all of that stuff as well, and read that and thought, wow, this is amazing. People actually do this sort of stuff. And then through that, I joined the Geelong Field Nats as well. And so I started to understand about, Birdline Victoria and going out and going on a twitch. And I think my first twitch was a Hudsonian godwit at Laverton Creek. And then, you always sort of have this idea of, okay, you could do a big year. And then a few people in Victoria did their own big years. And, all of this stuff just sort of sits in the back of your head. And up until the end of last year, I didn't have my license and I didn't have a car.
Right.
And so I'd always sort of said, in the car on the way back from Field Nats meetings with whoever I had gotten to give me a lift. Most of the time it was Marilyn and Dean Hewish, which are both excellent birders as well. I'd always be sitting there saying, once I get a car, no one's really going to see me much because I'm going to be out and about birding. And then it just so happened that I got my license at the start of December last year, got my car a couple of days later, and bumped into Paul and Ruth Dodd the following weekend at the Wandering Whistling Duck that turned up at Lake Colac in Victoria, and thought, right, game on. I want to, I would like to try and do this and do a big year because, I'm going to be probably all around the state anyway. So it's a chance to give it a try. So that, I think all of those things, sort of having that germ of an idea in my brain and then sort of going, well, I could do just a Victorian one. Like when I started out at the start of this year, I was sort of thinking, I could go to, southern New South Wales and go and find the Plains Wanderers up there, and I can go a bit into, South Australia and all of the stuff that goes through your head when you get your first car and you get that freedom to just be able to go out and go wherever. But I think once push came to shove and it got to the 1st of January and I actually started doing it, I thought, no, I'm just going to stick to Victoria. Occasionally do these sort of little trips over the border when we've been able to, but just really try and focus on Victoria. And it's been an incredible year.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking to themselves, "Oh man, yeah, I'd love to do a big year as well." And I've never done one, but I have also thought about it a lot. And so, do you have any advice before we get into the current big year and where you're at? Do you have any advice on if someone out there is watching or listening that's thinking about doing a big year? What would you tell them? What would you say is the best advice you could give to those people?
Probably don't plan one 3 weeks before the start of the following year. So you've actually got some time to save up some money, because that, for me, the big part of it at the end of this year is I'm bought myself a new pair of binoculars earlier this year. And the bills are starting to roll in and starting to bite. That's one thing. Make sure pelagic boats are going through the year if you're going to do a big year, because that's where there hasn't been a pelagic run in Victoria since the start of May. And that would be where I've lost a few birds. Maybe don't do one during COVID, just because COVID has it's been an interesting thing, in that I'm doing a big year, but I'm also coping with border closures, which means that when you're up in northern Victoria, for example, the easiest way to get from A to B might be to do a bit of a dog leg through New South Wales, but we can't, obviously we can't do that. And with the COVID lockdowns as well, it's also made it a bit more difficult. And, it's really, the other part of it is have a plan, but don't have a completely rigid, inflexible plan, because things change and birds turn up and all of that sort of stuff. I think they're probably the main things, but it's really, the things that have kind of made it more difficult for me this year have been lack of money, COVID lockdowns making it really hard to see some birds that would ordinarily be really easy, like song thrush in Melbourne. Normally most people go to Melbourne to see a song thrush.
Yeah,
I can't get into Melbourne. I'm in Geelong. The walls have been up since August, and no song thrush for me. So I've had to try and haunt all the places in Geelong where they used to be and try and find one that way. So those are probably the things.
Right. Yeah. So to recap
Yeah.
very briefly is so it's
Sorry.
it's having a like a budget, a good budget,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also to have a plan, but that's not too solid in case things change.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. 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 So they're probably the main things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then also don't be scared to put yourself out there and ask other people for help and introduce yourself to other birders as well. Like, there are a lot of people that I've met this year who have been absolutely above and beyond amazing and have been very generous with their time, and a couple of people with their funds, and with their advice as well, and with their knowledge, and with actually taking you to places where birds, places like, I honestly thought at the start of this year, I thought, the places I really wanted to get to were the Murray Sunset. I was sitting there thinking, how am I going to get to the Murray Sunset? And then also with other birders, how am I going to find all of these various things? And I've been really lucky in that I've had a few people who have been very, very helpful, and who have taken me to places and shown me stuff and told me where to find things as well. And all of those people have been people that I've met this year. So, yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So it's also a way to meet lots of different people. I'm sure you must meet so many people. That's just awesome. And so I just a quick sidebar. I am an eBird nut. I love eBird. So are you using eBird this year for your big year?
I am. It's sometimes not always used as well as it could be. There are a lot of incomplete lists, and there are a lot of times where I just don't bother doing lists. I was notoriously bad at writing stuff down. Some of the people from our field minutes group, Craig Morley, was always saying, Grace, write it down, put it on a list, make sure there's a list. Is it in eBird? And that might be partly because he's doing our regional bird report, but it might also be because he's an eBird moderator. And, it's like with anything else in science. If it's not written down, if it hasn't got a date and a time and a location, it may as well just not exist.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that ties into the eBird thing about, keeping records and tracking the distribution of species according to data. So you mentioned that so it wasn't as useful or as efficient as it could be. Why?
Well, I tend to bird first and list later. So I think it's a fairly good approximation of what I tend to do. I don't always, I'm not one of those people who sits there and counts the number of common bronzewings or thornbills or whatever. Someone actually had a go at me the other day because my eBird list had just X's on it, because I thought, well, I'm not counting. I'm more listening to things. I have no idea if there are 3 brown-headed honeyeaters in that tree or 10, and I'm not looking because I'm just stopping. And I was out looking for a brush bronzewing, which I didn't see, but I was doing, it was quick birding. It wasn't, I'm going out to count everything. And obviously there are people out there who do that, and that's perfectly fine, but that's just not always me and how I sort of function with all of this. So
absolutely, I see what you mean. Yeah. I'm the type of I'm the eBirder who always has his phone out and tries to count every single brown thornbill. I don't know. It does have its downsides, absolutely, and it's just I suppose it comes down to personality. Some people prefer to kind of memorize and then list later, as I think you do. And others like to go along as they, have their phone out and, oh, here's a brown thornbill, here's a grey fantail. Oh, there's an olive-backed oriole. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but I just like talking about eBird because it's such a powerful, it's a hugely powerful tool, very powerful. Yeah. More than I think we realize.
I mean, eBird is amazing. For me, for this year, I am basically planning the rest of my year based on eBird and seeing where different birds are popping up. The only downside that I sort of see with eBird sometimes is that when you get really rare stuff turning up, or when you get really uncommon stuff turning up, or twitches, or whatever it happens to be, if people can go to that exact spot, or a nesting powerful owl or something like that, if people can go to that exact spot and see that bird, the level of disturbance that that particular bird would experience now compared to 10 or 15 years ago before eBird, when you actually had to know the right people and put a bit more effort in. I think the level of disturbance is a lot higher, so I think there's a lot more of an onus on people to be ethical bird watchers, and I don't think that that's always the case now. I think, it's eBird's fantastic for documenting knowledge, but you can't, once you put something up and it's on the internet, you can't actually control who then sees that information and who, what they do with that. So, yeah, I see both sides of eBird, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of different ways to look at it. Absolutely. And so let's get to the update now. So we're all dying to hear how's it going? What's the consensus?
Okay. So I'm on 358. I've got about another 10 or 12 reasonably easy things to see, and then it's going to get more difficult.
Yeah.
And a lot of it now I think will depend on what happens after lockdown. Like, it will be great when all of the Melbourne people get let out of Melbourne and can go out bird watching, because I think it's definitely been more of a struggle the last few months, because all of the Melbourne bird watchers who be going up to places like Goshen and even up to Murray Sunset and Chiltern and all those sorts of areas, and who might be seeing things like the black honeyeaters and budgies and a few other things that I still need. You guys are all stuck in Melbourne still, so I'm assuming you're in Melbourne as well. So it makes it that bit harder. So I'm looking forward to that, because I'm looking forward to actually being able to see different people again as well, because there's a lot of people that I know that are stuck in Melbourne who I haven't seen for months. And, it's been great the last few weeks, because there's been a couple of twitches and a few interesting things turning up. But, it's really kind of brought it home to me, because the faces that you expect to see there aren't, the people that you expect to see on various twitches that, you think, oh yeah, that birder will go for that bird. You guys can't, because you're in Melbourne. So, it's been a different sort of feeling out there, that's for sure.
Right.
So, yeah. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm sorry guys, it's been a very, very long day and a very, very long week, and I'm kind of rambling, but yeah.
No, but that's good. We really do appreciate you coming on, and it's really fascinating. It's to get inspiration from someone doing a big year. Like, there's nothing like it. And so which bird, I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure there's a bird that pops into your mind as the one that brought you the most joy. What was the bird that was like, yes, I got it?
There's probably been a couple. The first one I can think of is a little bitten, and that was at Swan Hill on about day 5 or 6 of this year, on the 5th or 6th of January. And the night before I'd gotten into Swan Hill, I was going to camp at Goshen. I decided that I'd absolutely had enough of tents. I'd already had to clean up all of my gear after a flash flood at Wipperfeld on the 2nd of January.
Wow.
I was starting to feel a bit sick. And all I really wanted to do when I got into Swan Hill fairly late in the day. All the campsites were chock full. I drove into a caravan park that on the internet said that they had spaces, but when I got there, they said that they were full. And they took pity on me because I burst into tears. They took pity on me and they gave me this spot right down the back, because it was 10 o'clock at night. I couldn't go anywhere else, and I was buggered if I was going to go and camp out at Goshen. And so the next day I got up, I was really tired, and I was starting to think, do I keep going, or do I just chuck the whole year in here and now, when, before anyone's really heard anything about it, before I've got a chance to embarrass myself in front of everyone, do I just chuck it in? So I got a coffee and I got a sausage roll, and I pulled into this little wetland in Swan Hill, and it was just this little wetland next to the Murray River. And I thought, oh, can I be bothered getting out of the car, or do I just sit here and eat my sausage roll and drink my coffee and sort of ponder life and go, well, what do I do next? And so I hopped out of the car and I was walking into this wetland, and I saw this brown heron-shaped blur sort of fly out from the reeds in front of me and sort of perch up, I think it flew and it dropped down again, and then it flew and it perched up, and I was eye to eye with a little bitten. And at the start of the year, I'd been thinking, little bitten, how the hell am I going to find a little bitten? And, if I was 6 days in, here's this bird and it's staring at me. It's got its head up against the reeds, and there's this little eye just looking at me. And I thought, this is pretty amazing. Maybe I can do this. So
yeah,
I kept on going after that. But that was, it was this little suburban wetland. And I thought, looking at it, I thought, not the right habitat for a bitten, but I was wrong. And it was really, I think that was probably the bird that really made me think that I could do this year. And the other one was a couple of weekends ago, the stranded heron at Malakuta.
Oh, you got it. Did you get it?
I went to Malakuta. I was, as far as I knew, I was the only person to go and actually twitch it. I think everyone came after that, but I drove down to Malakuta, took a day off work, drove down to Malakuta, pulled up, and within about 10 minutes had this stranded heron. And it's a bird that I've seen before, but it was a Victorian, it was a big tick. It was certainly not something I was expecting to see. I think it was, at the time, it was about 88th on my Victorian needs list for the year. Of all the birds that are left. And no one had seen it for a couple of days, and I thought, there's no chance. There's absolutely no chance. And, pulled up, met Martin Butterfield, who's a birder down at Malakuta, and within about 10 minutes, the bird, the light was in the way, but the bird was there. And that was just fabulous as well, because that was, you know what it's like. You drive and drive. You go on a twitch, you have no idea whether the bird's still going to be there or not. And you pull up, and it's exactly where it's supposed to be.
Right.
So,
yeah. It's it's incomparable to anything else, I think. And listeners and viewers will forgive me, please, for rambling on about this. But I always like to try and discuss where the joy comes from. Why do we as humans? Why are we susceptible to such emotion when we see a bird? It's a mystery to me, and I'm so interested in that. And I'm interested. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, I'm not sure about your background, but what do you think? What do you think happens in the brain, or what do you think happens in the soul of a human, or at least a birder when that happens?
I was talking to, I think it was Rob Clay a couple of weeks ago, who's another birder from down that way. And he was saying that he thinks part of it is that, and I agree with him, I think part of it is that humans have never really grown out of the need to go and hunt things. We have grown out of the need to go and kill things because we don't need to anymore, because either we're vegans or someone else goes and does, or vegetarians, or someone else goes and does that for us, and we're completely divorced from the process. But it's that whole, you go out, you don't have a rifle, but you've got binoculars or a telescope, and you're going out and you're looking for something in particular. And it's, I suppose it, sort of the Audubon, the whole idea of the Audubon, when they changed from, every Christmas you go out and kill as many things as possible to every Christmas you go out and see as many birds as possible. Maybe that's where it's all started from. And for us, it's one thing to look through a bird book and, look at all the different birds in Australia and go, oh, it'd be nice to see a orange chat, or it'd be nice to see a princess parrot, or it would be nice to see a Burke's parrot, or any, oteric sandpiper, or any one of a number of different birds. And the thrill of I suppose it's the thrill of the chase when you go out looking, and it's the absolute joy you get when you go, wow, out of all of the places I could have looked, and I've put all of this effort in, or I've trudged through the mud, or whatever's happened, and there's this bird in front of me that I've wanted to see. That it's like, no one who's not, I mean, possibly duck hunters and hunters might understand it, but it's that whole thrill of the chase and the thrill of I don't really want to say the hunt because it doesn't quite sound right, but when you see something, or even if it's a bird you've seen 100 times before, and you just, it's doing something different, or it's the best look you've ever had at it, or all of that sort of stuff. I think that's where the joy comes from too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I was talking to Phil before, Phil Peel, and we talked about exactly the same thing, which is like, the primitive instinct of human beings.
Yeah.
It hasn't disappeared, and it's just in the case for birders, it's transmutated to just looking at the bird. But it is fascinating. It's really interesting, and so are you going to be doing more big years in the future, or is this the only one?
I think I need a break for about 10 years before I do another one. I would like to eventually, have a year off and travel around Australia and go and see, do the big Australian Big Year. But I think that's a long way off in the future for me. I probably wouldn't mind doing another Victorian Big Year. I might wait for an El Nino year to do it though, and when things are really dry and more vagrants are coming down from the north as well. Yeah, I mean, as amazing as this year is, someone was asking me a couple of months ago, do you back it up? Do you go and do another one next year? Because this year's been so affected by COVID, and by lack of pelagic boats. Do you go out 1st of January next year and go, right, I'm starting up in Wyperfeld, or I'm studying in Malakuta or somewhere else, do you go again? And, my answer a couple of months ago was, well, I think about it, but my answer now is, well, no, not for a while. So
Right. Yeah. Because it must be really, despite the joy and despite the excitement and the thrill of the hunt, it must be draining. It must be draining. Were there times where you just felt, oh, this is crap, man, I want out? Were there any times?
Yeah, there's been a couple of weekends. In the middle of the year, it started to get really hard, because I was going out weekend after weekend after weekend after weekend, and in June and July, when it's cold and it's wet and it's dark and there's not as many birds around, it was a bit more of a slog. And when I wasn't seeing birds, it was a bit more of a slog. But I think in the middle of the year as well, I lost my focus a bit. Like, it became more about just ticking the next thing and not focusing so much on just being out and birding. And I think back in, I think it was in August, Melbourne was in lockdown, and Geelong had been, I think at the start of this particular lockdown that all of the Melbourne people were still in. I think Geelong went into lockdown with you, and then we came out for like a week or 2 weeks or something.
I think
and
so,
I had a weekend, and my boss, Sharon, was lovely and gave me the Friday off and just said, look, you might not get out for a while again, so just, go. So I took off on Thursday night, and I did a big loop around Little Desert, Wyperfeld, up the Murrayville track, and sort of back down, and I think through Bendigo as well, and possibly that might also have been the weekend that the little stint turned up at Murderduke. So I might have gone to Lake Murderduke as well. It's all a bit of a blur. But I think, and I've kind of forgotten where I was going with that, but God, yeah, I mean that. Sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought. But
that's okay. That I understand. I think there's lots of things. There's lots of things that require so much energy in a thing like that. Like,
Yeah,
for example, like
yeah, I bet,
balancing. I'm sure a lot of people
yeah,
would wonder how you balance the work and the birding, because that's kind of the eternal struggle of the birder, is balancing.
yeah,
You know, unless
yeah,
you're doing professional birding in some form.
mm,
How
yeah,
how do
yeah.
you do that? How do you manage the kind of balance?
Um, Sometimes with difficulty. My boss Sharon gets very frustrated with me after really big weekends because Mondays and Tuesdays I'm a bit useless. And going back to where I was before as well, I've got train of thoughts come back. Um, I think that week, that particular big weekend, I decided to not focus on ticking, but to just focus on, hey, this might be my last weekend out for a while. I'm just going to, just focus on enjoying myself. And if I see birds, I see birds. If I don't see birds, that's okay as well. But just to get out and just
Yeah,
enjoy. So kind of reset my brain a bit. As far as a work-life balance goes, it's or work birding balance goes, it's not easy. There are people, like I'm living with my family at the moment because of COVID, because my job doesn't, it's not the highest paying job in the world, but it's also, it's easier at the moment with rent and all of that sort of stuff to just limit, and particularly with big years, to limit costs a bit. And there are people who barely see me during the week, who certainly don't see me on the weekends. And it's actually been really hard to keep that
yeah,
balance, going, to make sure that everything's done. Like tonight, it's a Friday night at the moment. I probably have to do my washing, hang the washing out in the rain, get it off the clothesline on Sunday if it's dry, so I've got clothes to wear for Monday morning. And in between all of that, try and work out where I'm going birding this weekend because it's Friday night and I still have no idea.
wow,
Um,
yeah,
and and try and do all of the other life stuff. So it's been really challenging, and it hasn't been easy. And anyone who says that they can work full time and do a big year and keep all of their life super organized is either lying through their teeth at you or they're a freak. One of the two.
brilliant.
Or they're working, or they're birding for, partially birding for a living, and so they can
Yeah,
kind of have that overlap. But it is, to do a big year and to work full time is a really, really hard gig.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And I don't mean to be soppy or too negative, but I think us birders are difficult to understand for a lot of people. And so
yes,
it's difficult,
yeah,
it's difficult for family who, we all have family who don't like birds or who are not into birding.
mm,
And
mm,
they have a hard time understanding and sometimes can get frustrated. And, it's like, oh, what, are you obsessed? What's going on? And it is
yeah,
difficult. It really is. And it's worth talking about as birders because,
yeah,
I don't know. And
yeah. It's one of
I certainly know what it's like.
mm, yeah,
And
it's one of those things, because people go, what, you're going birding, you're going birding again. But it's been interesting. It's actually been really interesting this year, because at the start of this year, the people I work with were kind of supportive, but they thought, oh God, this is this weird, Grace is off on a weird fringe greening hobby again, going birding, what's she doing, where's she going, all of that sort of stuff. And the funniest thing is that as we're getting closer and closer to the end of the year, the people that I work with in the office are actually going, hey, we want to come out with you one weekend and see what this birding thing's all about.
aha,
And that to me is, it's extremely funny. I've got one of our IT people at work, Stefan, was actually trying to pretend that he'd seen a blue petrel outside the 7-Eleven in Geelong eating chips the other week. And I'm going, dude, sorry, but I've been around for a bit, and blue petrels do not stand outside 7-Eleven eating chips. It just, it just doesn't happen. So it's been very funny watching that sort of interaction coming through. And and seeing that happen. It's been interesting watching some of my non-birder friends on Facebook trying to sort of get their head around the crazy things that I'm doing this year. And it's actually been quite entertaining watching other people as much as it's been going out and birding and everything, because you get everyone else's different reactions to what you're doing. And what I'm doing is certainly on the crazy obsessive end of bird watching. It's not your casual, might go out for a couple of hours on a Saturday morning for a walk with my binoculars. This is, go out. And I think the biggest weekend had Little Desert Bendigo and the Warby Ranges in it before I turned around and came home. So, it's not, it's not your standard bird watching, but it's still been a lot of fun.
No, absolutely. But it's all the more inspiring because of that, because of the dedication and because of the passion. And it's really, and you're quite well known now. I think, that you're the birder who's doing the Big Year this year. So it's really good, and it kind of, I think it's fantastic. And thanks. So, I'm wondering what I could ask you now, because it's just we've kind of been lost in this conversation. It's been fantastic. So did you? When I was listening to the episode you did with Michael, you mentioned that the Warby Ranges was your favourite spot. Is that still the case?
It's a funny thing. It changes. The Warby Ranges come to mind just because I find it very easy birding. Probably because I like birding in woodland habitats and forest habitats, and it's only a few hours up the road as compared to some of the other places which take half a day to get there. After spending the last 2 weekends at Mallacoota, so driving from Geelong to Mallacoota and back again, I have got a bit of a soft spot now for East Gippsland. But I also really love, the Wimmera. When you're on the Western Highway and you get past Mount Zero and the ground gets flat, and it's suddenly like you're out of the Grampians and you're into the Wimmera and up into the Mallee. It's, there's a lot of, part of me sort of thinks, right, I'm home, this is my other patch of birding. So it's a really hard thing for me to be able to say this year as to where my favourite spot is. I think the Warbies comes to mind because it's probably one of the more, and there'll be people that disagree with me about this, but it's probably one of the more intact places to go birding for woodland birds, because most of the stuff's still there. Like region honeyeaters are missing and bushstone curlews are missing, but most of those box ironbark woodland birds that you sort of expect to see, I've seen around the Warby Ranges, or I've seen around Chiltern further north. Yeah. So in that side of things, it's a favourite place because of that, if that makes sense. Plus, it's only about 3 or 4 hours up the road, so it's a bit easier to get to than some of these other places. So the sense of Mallacoota is great, but it takes me a full day of driving to get there and a full day of driving to get back. So, it's and the same to a degree with Hatter and Weiperfeld and Murray Sunset. They're all fabulous places, and I dearly love birding there as well. But it's also that sense of fatigue that kind of tempers everything. But I think after the last couple of weekends, Mallacoota and East Gippsland's just really, really grown on me. So
yeah, it's definitely a good spot down there. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's fantastic. All of that. So we're at the time of recording. We've got 2.5 months more to go. So that's not long.
No.
So what? Well, I want to ask 2 things. Firstly, what are the priorities for the last 2.5 months? Which birds do you think you could reasonably still get? And the second question is, how do you plan to announce the results at the end of the year?
Well, announcement I haven't really thought about. As far as the rest of the year goes and structuring it, I still need painted honeyeater, budgerigar, and black honeyeater. So part of me is thinking to head up towards Goshen and a few of the other places around there this weekend. I also still need malleefowl. So at some point there'll be a trip possibly over to Patchy Wallet to explore the mallee with Michael Gooch and Louise Nicholas, I think their names are. So there's those places. There's still a couple of things down around Malakuta. Like I've heard mast owl now. I've been to a spot where there was a mast owl 10 minutes earlier, but still haven't seen it. So that to me, I've got unfinished business down at Malakuta, and also cicada bird as well as another bird and ground parrot would be birds that I could see down there.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping that someone finds a Horsham bush stone curlews before the end of the year, because I've looked 6 times and haven't seen them yet.
Right.
And then there's a few other things that sort of spring to mind that I'll just pick up here and there. And I'm really hoping that Melbourne opens up again to regional people soon, because brush bronzewings are one of those birds I still haven't seen.
Wow.
I've been here, there, and everywhere. I've been to the distillery dam at Bendigo probably 6 times this year. I've camped there overnight. I've been there first thing in the morning. I've been there last thing at night. I've been there in the middle of the day when I'm too tired to pick up my binoculars. And I still haven't seen them yet. So they're a bird that seem to be in a few different places in Melbourne fairly reliably. So
yeah,
they'll be a bird that I go up and have a look for.
I think so. Yeah. That's awesome. Like, just best of luck with all of that. It's really a really good journey.
Yeah, hopefully another pelagic or 2 by the end of the year as well. I know there's talk about getting boats started up again, possibly more for regional people than Melbourne people at the moment, and I'm so sorry. But it's like anything else. With birding, it's really hard to make plans. So you take the opportunities when you can get them. If there's another pelagic that goes out, great. If it doesn't, well, it is what it is, and that's just the joy of this year. I think the other part of it with birding is that, and particularly with big years, is that it's a big gamble. You roll the dice, you drive. In the case of the spectacled monarch that turned up at East Gippsland at Malakuta last week, you take a day off work or you take a half day off work and you jump in the car and you drive and you get to this spot, and the bird may or may not be there. And when you get to Malakuta and the bird's there, as in the case of the striped heron, it's an amazing feeling, and it's such a high because you've done the gamble, you've spent your money on petrol, and you've taken the time off work, and it's paid off.
Yeah.
But when you get to East Gippsland, we get to Malakuta, and you get to the spot where the bird was the day before, and you spend almost a full day crashing around in the bush looking for it, and it doesn't turn up. It's still great because you see people and you see birds, and you get the time off work, and it's still fabulous, but it's extremely frustrating to a point that you take the time off and you spend the energy and you miss seeing something by 18 or 20 hours.
Yeah, it must be frustrating.
So yeah. I was, part of me was frustrated on the weekend. Part of me was just like, well, that's bird watching, and that's the thing. And there would have been some very rude words said on Facebook on Monday if I'd gotten home and someone had seen it late on Sunday afternoon or first thing on Monday morning. I would have been extremely frustrated. But it is what it is. It's birding, and it's a challenge, and it's a hunt, and it's a gamble, and it's it's a lot of fun, and it can be stressful, but it's incredible, and it can be very, very tiring. But,
wow, that's that's really great, and thanks for taking the time to update us and and talk about the experience, because you know, I'm sure that you've inspired a lot of people. I'm sure, and I think that's a good place to start to wrap up, actually. And I wanted to ask maybe one last question just to close. Do you have any other hobbies or interests apart from birding at all?
Well, I hike a bit. I knit a bit as well, which is really funny because there are jokes about women crafter birders that they don't tend to go very far from the car, and they don't tend to, I've heard a couple of things that, they're not necessarily the best birders in the world. They're not necessarily the most outgoing birders in the world. So I hope that this year I've proved that one wrong. But, I think birding's kind of become the all-eclipsing big thing that will probably be there for a long time to come. I do, when I'm not birding and when I couldn't go out and do this sort of level of birding, I was quite involved with our local Field Nets Club fauna group, and I do want to get back to that as well. So getting back into mammals and bats and frogs and lizards and all of the other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just, I was thinking about all of those sorts of questions earlier tonight, and I'm thinking, God, what did I do before this year in birding? And I really can't answer that. But I know that, I know that when there's been gaps when I haven't been able to go out birding, there's been bits of a jumper sort of half started and half started knitted, but hasn't really gotten very far. It's been too many other things to do, things to enjoy. So yeah,
that's right. Well, I hope you can.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's it. Let's wrap up, Grace. Thank you again so much. It's really great, and I appreciate that my podcast is a bit newer, so you didn't really know what we're getting into. But this is really great. So thanks very much, and hope to meet you one day.
Yeah, well, it's been amazing fun. So thank you very much for having me on, and it's been really, really good. So thank you.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you, Grace. Right. Happy birding and good luck for the rest of the year.
Yeah. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Birding Today podcast. New episodes are released every Friday, and if you'd like to get in touch, just write an email to birdingtoday@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.